Hello, good day. So our topic for today, edition 101, as pursuant to our syllabus. So good morning and hope you would be able to learn from this topic. If you have any questions, kindly comment it below. Okay, let's proceed. So our learning objective for this topic is number one, to be able to define taxation. Number two, to be able to understand the importance of fiscal benefits. Three, to be able to know the different concept, theories, and principle of the Philippine income taxation. So, what is taxation? So, there are various definitions of taxation, and one of it is an act, process, or means by which the sovereignty, through its law-making bodies, makes demand for revenue in order to support its taxes and carry out its legitimate objectives. So, take note, it's an act. Why it's an act? Because normally it's the government will be able to pass a law so that they would be able to tax people. Process because it is adjunct to different businesses. So you need to have the business permit, and then the government will issue a TIN or tax identification number so that you would be able to they would identify your payment by means which sovereignty through a lawmaking body, because sovereignty means the Philippines, it's the sovereign, and then lawmaking body because usually taxation pass through the legislative by means of law. So they would usually enact it under the law like RA. Remember that the train law is an RA. But the demands for revenue, meaning that impose revenue, so impose taxes or impose collection from all our earnings. Take note, all our earnings. So meaning it's legal or illegal, it's taxable to support its existence and carry out the legitimate objective. Why do we need to pay tax? It's because we support the government. So since the government is protecting us, or they need to pay some or to defray their expenses, so as a citizen, usually uh, us to pay for them and to carry out its legitimate objective. So our tax normally go to stabilize people so that yung mga benefit like ayuda, the building of bridge, and the roads. So those are where the taxes go. So it's also an inherent power by which the sovereign state impose financial burden. Why financial burden? Take note, it's financial burden because it's an additional expenses on the people. Okay? Upon the power and property as a means of raising revenue in order to defray necessary expenses to the government. This is what Tax Digest said. So it's an inherent power because it is part of the government, meaning nobody could do the tax itself except for the government. Impose financial burden because it's an additional expenses on our part because we need to pay tax. Like for example, our salary is automatically deducted some taxation upon person. So this is from our income. Take note, if you would check, our taxation has two kinds, which we would later discuss. Person, these are for the compensations. So meaning we are taxed on our income. On everything that we earn, we are taxed. So that's by person. And by property, because when we buy some stocks or transfer some property, we are also taxed under capital gains tax. So these two are being taxed by the government. And also our vices like cigarettes, when we buy cigarettes, when we buy alcohol, those are also a means to tax us. Now, I don't know if beautification would be included, but as part of the proposed train law, it has been part means of raising revenue in order to defray the necessary expenses. So our taxes go to the salary of the government employees, to our presidents, and some benefits that are given to the poor, especially to the poor of the poorest like the ayuda. Next, hence its imposition on financial charges or levy upon the taxpayer. So taxpayer are those people who earn in the state. Um, for example, halimbawa, di ba, kung maaalala nyo, yung ayuda, most people don't like that. Kasi they said na tinuturuan maging tamad yung Filipino. But if you would check, the reason behind the ayuda was it's in order to help the younger people or the next generation not to become like their parents. So meaning this younger generation be able to send to school, so in the future become a fruitful citizen of the of the Philippines. Kasi nga, yung parents, hindi nila mapag-aral yung mga anak. So, ang tendency, pag nagkasakit sila, punta sila sa public hospital, which is sobrang puno na. And yet, most expenses that the government paid are for these people. Pero wala naman silang naibibigay na tax sa gobyerno. So, in order to not to punish the young ones, dahil mahirap yung parents nila, binibigyan sila ng ayuda para makapag-aral yung young ones. So that these young ones will be able to become literate and be able to find jobs in the future and therefore become part of the pool of the taxpayer. Okay? Next. So, tax is the enforced proportional contribution from person and the properties levied by the state or by virtue of the sovereign for the support of the government and for public needs. So take note, enforced proportional contribution. Why proportional contribution? Kasi nga, those people who earn more are taxed more. Because you would tackle later na makita nyo that the taxes were in form of the schedules. So the higher the income, the higher the taxes. Normally, lahat naman ng government ganun eh. So that it would stabilize. So the people who earn more will be given this to the government to be used to defray the government expenses like the salary, like the building of the roads, the building of the public hospital, the supply of food chain, which are also given to the public needs like for example, the public school. So these are for the public hospital. So if you don't have money, you'd be able to go to the public hospital or to the public schools. Okay? Do you have any questions? So, nature of taxation. So, there are also three nature of taxation. So, number one, it is inherent in sovereignty. Why? Because it is essential to the existence of the government. So, meaning, if there is a government who rule, why? They said that the government promote peace and order. So, in order to be able to do this peace and order, they need money or they need money to defray their expenses. Hence, it become inherent to the people or inherent to the government, to the sovereignty, so that the government will be able to have the power to tax every people so that they will be able to have the money to defray the expenses. Next, it is legislative in character. The power to tax is peculiar and exclusive and vested to the Congress. So why? Because the Congress is the one who will be able to think or be able to plan. So sila yung gumagawa ng mga batas para sa kung ano yung itatax or yung mga rules and regulation or the RR, the revenue regulation or the implementation law, the IRR. Why? Because the implementation of the rules and regulation, these are the detailed of what is to be taxed and what is to do, or in short, the process. Next, it is also subject to inherent and constitutional limitation. However, since so that the government will not be able to abuse its power to tax people, there are two kinds of limitation, inherent and the constitutional limitation. Take note, under the inherent limitations, so these are already the limitations na hindi na pwedeng palitan unless the constitution or would have been revised. So inherent limitations, so these are part of the government. And constitutional, these are vested within the constitutions. So you would later tackle these two kinds or what are the inclusion of inherent and constitutional limitation. Okay, because the penal law, the civil law, and or the kinds of law are subject to this limitation, meaning they cannot produce a law na mag-violate dito kay inherent at kay constitutional limitation as well as the tax law. Okay? Now, what are the scope of taxation? So, ano ba yung mga tinatax? So, number one, it is levied to tax is essentially for public purpose. So, take note, we are taxed so that we will be able to pay some activities for public purpose, so meaning for other people. So, it's levied essentially to the public or for public purpose. The reason behind, bakit ba tayo tinatax? It's for the government and to be able to defray or be able to the government be able to do activities that are essentially para sa public. Like for example, yung ayuda, if we would check, kung hindi natin alam yung reason behind that, isipin natin na mali yun kasi tinuturuan yung maging tamad yung mga tao. But since we know now na it's for these young ones para makapag-aral so that in the future they will be also become a fruitful citizen of the people. So makikita mo, it's for the public so that these young ones will be able to contribute to the government funds that are being used to finance the roads, the bridges, and so on and so forth. Now, the subject or tax to be taxed may be person. So, natural or juridical. So, if you remember under your taxation, under your business law, so the natural people are the individuals, like the sole proprietor, the general partners, and the juridical persons are the corporation. So, these three kinds of businesses, the sole proprietor, the partnership, and the corporation are also being taxed. So despite the corporation are only juridical person, take note they still have the right to sue, the right to do business. So they are also taxed. So property, it could be real. So real property, we know these are our immovable properties or our houses. So these are taxed under our every year tax or the property tax. And then it's also have the under the transfer or the capital gains tax. So the personal property, so our precious precious like cars, those are immovable. These are also taxed every year. The tangible and intangible, so our patents and our tangible properties, so are also being taxed by the government. So the following may be included as subject or object. So business. Take note, we also have the business tax. Transaction tax, these are for our cigarettes, and when we do excise tax, so for every drilling, so these are also the right and privileges. So the right to do business and the right to transfer. So these are also being taxed. Next, the amount and tax rate which shall be uniform and equitable. If you would check why it's becoming uniform, meaning it's uniform because everybody would be able to earn this particular amount, so it become now equitable. So kasi nga 'di ba, mas itinatax yung mas maraming pera kaysa dun sa mas konti lang yung na-earn. Uniform kasi for every transaction, right and privileges that is being exercised, there are only usually one rate. For example, if you are into writing, so these are royalty tax. It's imposed to every writing and 10%. If you have money at the bank, it is taxed 20%. So it is uniform rate. Okay? Next, the manner and mode of enforcement and collections. So take note that only the government will be able to enforce and collect the taxation. Pero take note, the collection are now vested against the banks and some authorized by the government to collect our money for easier payments. Okay? The situs of taxation may be exercised only within territorial jurisdiction of the taxing authority. So take note, our tax, so since later we would be able to know or to identify the different people being taxed, you will know that the situs means that the taxes here in the Philippines, meaning all the activities here in the Philippines can only be taxed. However, the Filipino citizen residing abroad and earning for them, these are also differently. You would remember yung nangyari kay Pacquiao, 'di ba, na chinek siya ng BIR kasi na-tax na sa kay US pero itinatax ulit dito sa Philippines. Although there are some reciprocity law. So meaning kasi all the income earned by the government inside and outside the Philippines because they fall under the person is taxable. Okay? Except for one kasi merong sinasabi na the OFW or the bagong bayani are tax-free. So if you are going abroad and earning and you don't have the contract under the OFW, then all your income is now taxable. Okay? Actually, even your importations, taxable talaga yan under, but kaya lang some people would complain. Now, classification of tax. So it is enforced contribution. So a tax is not voluntary and imposition is in no way dependent upon the will and assents of the person being taxed. So take note, hindi hindi forget ko, kasi dito sa Philippines sometimes hindi kumukuha ng permits eh. Pero, hindi daw yun dapat ganun kasi pwede kang ma-sue under the tax evasion law. Sa ibang bansa marami nun eh. So meaning, enforce, ibig sabihin, it is not kung kailan mo lang gusto magbayad kasi mape-penalty ka na ni BIR. So it's enforced contribution, meaning you don't have the right to say no because it's a mandatory contribution or it's a mandatory collection for every people who earn money. Okay? Who earn or practice or have the privileges being able to practice here in the Philippines. So it's a mandatory collection. Next, it is proportionate in character. The share of the taxpayer on public burden is essential based on one's ability. So, di ba, if sabi ko nga sa inyo, makita nyo later na yung tax natin were subject into table. So, the higher the income, the higher the tax. Because they wanted to equalize na yung people na mas maraming kinikita, mas marami dapat or mas maraming rights na ine-exercise dito sa Pilipinas, mas marami dapat na tax na babayaran. Next, it is levied by the law-making body of the state. The power to tax is vested unto Congress. Example, the House of Representatives. So, si House of Representatives, sila yung gumagawa ng tinatawag na tax bill. Bakit sila? Kasi take note, the House of Representatives is a representation of every Philippine provincial or every Philippine state. So, sila yung mas malapit dun sa mga tao at mas nakakaalam kung ano ba yung mga ginagawa or practices or activities of the people. Hence, they are the one who introduced the tax bill. So, sila yung nag-authorize doon. And then, the Senate would be able to pass that. The Congress determine who to tax. So, si Congress, kasi nga sila yung mas malapit sa tao because they are on placed on a different provinces or on a different state or on a different cities in the Philippines. So, they're the one who determine who is to tax, what is to tax, and how to tax shall be collected. Okay? So, take note that they are not involved in collection thereof. But, however, hindi sila yung nagko-collect. Take note, diba? Who imposed the taxation? It's BIR. It's the local government, but not the Congress. Because the Congress are merely the lawmaking body or they are the one who suggest the different kinds of bills. So, kasi they are also being taxed eh. So, nagtinataksan din sila under their compensation when they were properties. So, natatax din sila. Kaya, hindi sila yung, kasi, di ba, parang pwede kasing, kung sila rin yung nagkukolect, pwede kasing vested interest. So, under our audit, we also need to have check and balance. Ganun din kay government. Okay? Okay. So, what govern taxation? So, number one, the Constitution under Article 6, Section 28 of the Constitution state that the rule of taxation shall be uniform and equitable, and the Congress shall evolve a progressive system of taxation. So, ito yung isang reason why we are, or the number one tax, why we are being imposed by the tax. So, meaning, it's part of our Constitution. Under Section 28. Which state na dapat nga daw uniform and equitable. And the Congress, sila yung gagawa ng progress ng taxation system. So, the national law, the NIRC, or the National Internal Revenue Code enacted under Republic Act 8484 or the Tax Reform Act of 1997. Pero, these are subsequently amended, which is now the law and the most recently named as RA 10963 or the Tax Reform or the Acceleration and Inclusion Act. So, ito yung bago ngayon. So, yung dati kasi, kung dito kay Republic Act 8484, mas mahirap pa kasi you need to memorize magkano ba yung deduction dependent, magkano yung deductions ni single, married, head of the family. Si train law, ang ginawa niya, mas tinaasan niya na lang yung hindi itatax. Dito kasi 30,000 lang ang hindi natatax eh. Pero dito, ginawa niyang 200,000. So daw, mas maraming maiiuuwing take-home pay yung mga mas maliliit na empleyado. So, but we would tackle more on Republic Act 10963 kasi ito na yung bagong tax law natin. Next, the local laws or the major source of revenue for the local government. So, are the taxes collected by virtue of the Republic Act 7160 or the Local Government Code of 1991. And those source and proceed collected by the virtue of local ordinance. So, ito yung mga cedula, business permit, or the municipal permit para makapag-practice ka ng businesses. So, they are naman governed by the law because the local government is the one collecting that, the amilyar or the property tax. So yan yun. Okay? Next. So the principle of sound tax system, sabi nila, dapat daw meron tayong fiscal adequacy. The source of the revenue should be sufficient to meet the demand and public expenditure. So, ito hindi kasi ito masyado namimit eh. Kasi when we say fiscal adequacy, dapat hindi na nangungutang yung gobyerno. So, dapat yung tax na nakukolekta was sufficient enough para nang sa ganun, maibigay yung mga pangangailangan ng tao. However, dito sa Philippines, hindi pa ito na-achieve kasi mas madalas kapag may mga activity tayo or para mapunuan yung mga pera na kailangang i-expense ni government, nangungutang siya. So, hindi pa natin atin sa fiscal adequacy. The theoretical justice, the burden just to be proportional to the taxpayer's ability. So, ito naman, kasi sinasabi nga na, dapat daw, ito, ano na natin, solusyon natin the train law because the higher the pay, the higher the tax. So, kaya nga daw, dapat yung sa train, yung mga activities natin na hindi naman usually at hindi lahat nakakagawa, itinataksan din. Halimbawa, pagbili ng alak, pagbili ng cigarette. Kaya lang, 'di ba? If you would check, mas karamihan pa ng nagsisigarette is the people from the lower level of the community. Okay? So, kaya mas mataas na yan ngayon. Or anything that would yung reason kaya nagkakaroon pa ng mas malaking expenses yung government. Kaya 'di ba, nagkaroon na yung sa sugar. That's why soft drinks now become a little bit higher because of the sugary drinks. Tinaksan na din. Next, we also have the administrative feasibility in order to be capable of being forced not to burden and to pay in a convenient manner. So, take note, ito naman, ginagawa to ng government. So, para daw mas mabilis kayong makapagbayad, kaya kung mapapansin mo, pwede na magbayad through GCash, so may mga online facility na so that it would be not stress-free para makapagbayad ka ng tax. Yun nga lang, ang problema, kapag yung government or nagbabag yung system nila, ang nangyayari tuloy, hindi tayo makapagbayad ng mabilis, so naging isa pa sa hassle, di ba? But the reason why there are EFPS and online is for us to be able to pay our taxes much convenience and easily. Next, here are now the inherent limitations. So take note, the tax should not violate or should be based on this also. Meaning, hindi sila pwedeng gumawa ng taxation na hindi masasubject sa limitations na to. So number one is the public purpose. So meaning, the tax should be given for the general welfare. Or the reason of us being taxed is that so that we would be able to have the fund to be able to defray the government expenses for general purpose. Halimbawa, the government need to create roads, bridges, public hospital, and so on and so forth that are for the general welfare. Non-delegability of the legislative taxing power. So meaning it's only the Congress who has vested the power to tax others and cannot be delegated. So sila lang yung merong right to write a law on the power of taxation. Exemption of government instrumentality in exercising essential government function. So take note that the government, meron siyang mga government power na hindi pwedeng mag-exercise nung governmental function. Halimbawa, di ba, if you would check, only the local and the tax and the Bureau of Custom are the one who collect taxes. The internal committee, the property of foreign state or government may not be taxed by another. Pero usually, it's based on the reciprocity. So, kung hindi tayo tinatax sa ibang bansa, yung government doon hindi tinatax, yung government din dito hindi tinatax. So, okay? So, may mga ganon. The situs or territory. As a rule, the taxing power cannot go beyond the territorial limit of the taxing authority. So, kaya kung mapapansin mo, yung mga foreigner dito, tinatax lang sila sa activities nila dito at hindi dun sa activities nila sa ibang bansa because the right vested upon them is only the exercise of the power to do business and to do things here on the Philippines. So yun nandun ang maggagawa na is the situs or their resident country. However, if the Filipino here goes abroad tapos nag-earn siya abroad, apart pa rin siya ng situs because take note, there are still citizen of the Philippines. Okay? Next, the situs of taxation is the state or the country which has jurisdiction to tax people property of interest. So, yun nga. Take note, the situs, dito yun. Kaya kung mapansin mo, yung mga person outside the Philippines are also being taxed. Pero tsaka yung mga properties on interest nila doon. Okay? Pero kapag hindi sila taga doon, dito sila nagpa-practice, pasok sila sa territorial. So, meaning the foreigner who do business and own some land, no, they cannot own land. Some businesses here in the Philippines, they are being taxed. Pero dito lang. Pero kapag situs of taxation, yung mga Filipinos na nagpunta abroad, ita-tax din sila kung ano man yung mga ari-arian doon. Okay? But subject to some reciprocity law. So we have constitutional limitations. Number one, there should be due process and protection clause. So kaya nga di ba merong Miranda law. So kaya kailangan bago ka malaman ipayaran mo ng paglilitis. So number two, freedom of religious and worship. Kasi nga di ba dito, everybody could choose their religion. Pwede silang magpalit-palit agad-agad. Next, non-impairment of contract. So, kung mapasin nyo, in your obligation and contract, the meetings of the mind or those that are written in the contracts prevail over some of the unless it is contrary to law. Next, non-imprisonment for non-payment of personal obligations. So, halimbawa, pag nangutang ka sa classmate mo, hindi ka nakapagbayad, hindi ka pwedeng ikulong. Kasi minsan maliit lang ng person. But, take note, it's a different thing kapag you issue checks. Kasi there is a fraud. Sinasabi mo na meron kang pera or may laman niyang check na yan, pero wala. So, that means panluloko yun. So, hindi siya part neto. Okay? Next, pero pag halimbawa, hindi ka nagbayad ng credit card, ayun, hindi ka makukulong kasi that's personal obligation. However, guys, medyo mag-tainted nga lang yung inyong credit reputation. So, mahirapan ka mangutang. Next, revenue, appropriation, and tariff bill to originate from the House of Representatives. So, meaning, all the law concerning the tax, kailangan, sino mo nang magagawa? Katulad ng sinabi natin kanina, it's the House of Rep. That would later be validated by the Senate. And then, pwede na siyang pumirma. Next, it should be uniform and equality. So, kailangan, pare-pareho, tsaka nagpo-promote ng equality or to equate the poor and the rich people. Next, exemption of property actually or directly or exclusively used for religious, profitable, and education purposes. So, Section 30 of Tax Code. At least sabi ko sa inyo, why? Because they said that the religious people help people to be able to have hope. The charitable institution help people by giving them or giving dole out. Educational purpose, helping the people, the citizen of the Philippines, to become literate. So these are now our constitutional limitations. Okay? If you like this video, please help me reach out more people by hitting the subscribe button below. And God bless you. If you have any questions, just comment below. Okay? Bye. Hope you have a good day.